Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Christopher Oyier. I'm an advocate and a practitioner in the REIT space. And it's an honor to take you through this session, which focuses on service provider contracts. You've had a lot of background on how REITs are supposed to be structured. And obviously there are a lot of parties who have to be included, advisors who have to be part of the transaction documentation. And I'll just make some general preliminary comments on service provider contracts. First of all, usually as lawyers, you do not assume that that parties know what they want to do unless it's written. So you can't make an assumption until you have the actual provisions the parties negotiate into the contracts. And for REITs, one key thing is that most of these contracts are required at submission stage when you're making the applications before CMA. And so you find yourself having very limited time to draft and negotiate the terms before you make the regulator application. And sometimes you might find it very difficult to negotiate the terms after submission and approval by CMA. Having said that, I think the key thing for any promoter or initial issuer of REIT securities, you involve a lot of transaction advisors and lawyers are key to help you do certain things. And so what are the key things you need to get from a lawyer to help you structure your contracts? So first, the lawyers help you in preparing advising on the REIT structure, which one of the speakers has spoken about. So whether you're going to go with a restricted or a restricted list, whether it's open-ended or closed-ended, whether you need to list it or you need to have it as unlisted, the lawyer will help advise you on that. And secondly, the lawyer will help you with the preparation of the scheme documentation, which as provided in the regulations, there are a lot of documents that must speak to each other. So drafting is very key and the lawyer is needed for that. Thirdly, you need the services of a lawyer to help you prepare the service provider contracts. So as you engage the REIT manager, the property manager, the project manager, certifier, the structural engineer, you need all their contracts to be aligned in a certain way. First of all, with the regulations and with all the scheme documentation. A lawyer is also necessary to help you do a lot of due diligence on the property. First of all, the REIT property you want to acquire, and also on the parties. Sometimes you have parties who are selling the property to you, or you need to enter into some arrangements, for example, with the investee company. So there's a lot of due diligence that goes into before you engage the parties or get the properties or enter into certain contracts. And then another key thing that you need lawyers to help you with is to prepare legal opinion. These are requirements under the REIT regulations. So the opinions on the property, opinions on the REIT assets, then opinions on the trust deed, and on compliance with the regulations, and compliance with other routine matters within the scheme documentation. The lawyers are usually required to give various opinions, and some of these, as I've mentioned, are needed at submission stage when you're making the application. But even as you implement the REIT structure, some things come up and you need routine opinion on various matters. The second last item there is for incorporation of investee companies. If the REIT is not going to hold the REIT assets directly, or is going to invest through partnership with some structures, some substructures, you need the lawyer to prepare, especially the memorandum and articles of association and shareholder agreements where this will be necessary. And then finally, and very importantly, once all these documents are ready, you need the help of a lawyer to prepare and submit the applications to obtain the licenses and then any other regulator approvals. So the slide there provides a typical REIT structure, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, how the assets are to be held, and the key parties, of course, the trustee, the unit holders who invest in the REIT, and very importantly, the REIT manager. So the REIT manager and the trustee are the anchor parties, if I can use that term, in a typical REIT transaction, and they're very key in when you're engaging service providers. So in the box on the left there, you see a list of other advisors who have to be engaged by the REIT trustee in consultation with the REIT manager. So I'll go straight to some of the specific agreements, and the ones that we'll cover include agreements of the project manager certifier, which in the regulations you have requirements to engage a project manager certifier. Under regulation 17, they're supposed to submit some opinions. So you need to have a draft agreement with a project manager certifier, which the CMA has to look at the time you're making the application. And they also have to sign off on your prospectus or offer memoranda as per regulation 37 of the REIT regulations. And for REITs, there are very specific requirements for the project manager certifier, which you can see, and they're listed there under regulation 63. So they have to meet certain qualifications in terms of the expertise they must have. So are they a member of the Institute of Surveyors or Architect? Do they have quantity surveying or project management experience? They have to be incorporated in Kenya if it's a corporate body. If it's a natural person, they have to be residing in Kenya, and they have to have in place a professional indemnity. But importantly, there's need for them to have a professional indemnity because of the opinions they make in the reports and documents that go into the prospectus and the subsequent compliance documents of the REITs. So that indemnity is a very key component of project manager certifier agreement, which I'm going to talk about. Now, one thing about the agreements for all these service providers is that they typically follow almost a similar format because they relate around the construction, management, valuation of the REIT assets. So all the contracts, they're somewhat related, and you'll see from some of the suggested clauses, the contracts more or less talk about how the assets are supposed to be managed from a construction point of view. So some of the clauses for this kind of agreement with a project manager certifier, subject to meeting the requirements of the regulations, are clauses like on the appointment of the project manager certifier. Do they meet the qualifications required under the regulations? How do you describe the project? These are standard construction-related provisions, but very important. Then what is the scope of services? During the construction, there's some services that they may need to offer pre-construction, like those ones for offering certain opinions that go into the prospectus or offer memorandum, the remuneration, the professional indemnity, and termination clauses. Of course, that's not exhaustive, but those are some of the key clauses that have some linkages with the requirements we have in the REIT regulations. The second set of contract with professionals is the one relating to mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineering. And this has been described as the central nervous system of a building. So how do you ensure there's linkage between the various contractors or subcontractors working on different components of the construction of the REIT asset? So the mechanical bits deal with things like heating, the air conditioning, mechanical ventilation, the construction. The electrical bit, of course, deals with the electrical and lighting installations, and the plumbing deals with the plumbing layout, water supply, heating, and drainage within the buildings. It's very important that there's integration of all the construction activities, and that's why this contract is very important in the construction sector, and so with extension to the REIT sector. A key consideration for parties or for us lawyers when you need this kind of contract is to look at the timing of some of the approvals that need to be obtained for integration. For example, you need to get approvals from Kenya Power and Lighting. You need to get approvals for integration with the sewerage services of the city county. So the timing of the applications, the obligations, how you allocate that in the contract, and even the communication between the various subcontractors doing the construction, all those are key to the agreement. And I've mentioned there that, of course, the industry standard contracts that people usually adopt, but the key clauses that one must consider are on the project. How do you describe the project? What is the scope of services of the service provider in relation to the services and compliance by the REIT with the regulations? How is the implementation supposed to be done? Things like contract variation. How do you allocate the cost of any variations? So if a plumbing system is delayed and another subcontractor has delivered up to a certain point, what's the cost of reversal or changes in some of those construction items? The fees, and of course insurance. I've mentioned most of these service providers have an obligation to act independently and advise the trustee and the REIT manager independently. So those are some of the typical clauses you will have your lawyer looking at to ensure they comply with the regulations. I'll move to the contracts involving the civil and structural engineer. Directly under Regulation 62 for IREITs, you need to appoint a structural engineer who, among others, is supposed to help the REIT manager and the trustee to have certain information regarding the state of repair of the property, and this has to be independently assessed. If there are certain defects in the property that may not be apparent, so latent defects, it's the duty of the structural engineer to ensure these are identified and taken into account, first of all, in the valuation of the particular property, and also in ensuring that the costs, they're properly costed and disclosed in the preliminary documents, so in the offer memorandum or the prospectus, and subsequently in the annual reporting documents of the REIT. These have to be properly disclosed. And the reason why they have the insurance, as I mentioned, is they provide independent opinion on some of these items. So the clauses, I think, would be largely similar. What is the project being undertaken? You appoint the service provider. What is the scope of services? What are the responsibilities of the service provider and the standard of care? What fees and payments are applicable? What about the insurance? So if insurance in construction is a key component because it affects, of course, not only the risk, it's a risk management tool in the contract, but if you engage the structural engineer and the subcontracts, how do you ensure that the insurance flows down even to the subcontracts, so that the unit holders are covered. If the property is affected at any point, there's a way you manage that risk. Of course, other standard provisions include dispute resolution, and there's the usual procedure in various contracts. You first start by negotiations, and then you escalate it if you need to engage an expert on terms that parties cannot agree on. Those are clauses you build into the dispute resolution clauses. The final contract I'm going to talk about is for survey agreements. You're aware there are different types of surveyors, but our focus is quantity surveyors in this context. And the role of a surveyor is really very simple and straightforward. It relates to costing of the construction aspects of whichever project. So the surveyor is required to give quotations based on the measurements or estimates from the architect, and produce a bill of quantities, which feeds into the valuation for the work done. There are certain roles that relate to preparation of interim certificates. So a survey is very important in the monitoring the payment process throughout the contract, also helping in preparing the final account. So the overall cost management of the project during construction, you need to have a surveyor to manage that for you. And as with the other contracts, usually there's a lot of recourse to standard industry contracts with various clauses on project description, the services, what are the obligations of the parties, the client, the quantity surveyor, what are the fees, expenses, the standards, payment, disputes. So largely, as I conclude, you find that for the set of contracts we're discussing, there are already industry set standards which parties typically use to enter into these arrangements. The only extra duty for the lawyer or the drafter of these contracts is to ensure that the contracts speak to the scheme documents and the REIT regulations. And then secondly, the timing of the negotiation of this contract is very key, because as I've mentioned, at the point you're making the application for a REIT license, you need to provide either the draft or the concluded service provider contract. So as a point of advice, a client will be well advised to ensure that before you go to CMA to start any process, you ensure that the contracts are already speaking to the draft scheme documents that you have, because after approval, it is unlikely that you'll be able to come again and negotiate some of the terms, because again, that requires you go back and get additional approval. But by and large, I would insist that it's very key that the promoter or or parties who are trying to get list or to get additional property under REIT, engage lawyers at every stage of contracting with these service providers, because the risk of non-compliance affects, of course, the performance of the REIT and the distribution to the unit holders. So I would want to stop there and invite questions. Thank you very much.